Hello the internet, you're all well, thanks for stopping by. Today I am looking at this, the Brook Raslution 2 adapter for PS5, 4 and 3. I've had this since March this year, so I've had it nearly 5 months. I've given it a good thrashing with many PlayStation games from the F1, Dirt Rally and Gran Turismo range. Inside the box you get the Raslution adapter itself and a USB-C to USB-A cable. That goes from the adapter into the PS5 or PS4 or PS3. It needs to be noted that out of the box the firmware on this is out of date. The Moza pit house has been updated several times, so the firmware for your Moza will be too new for the Brooks to cope with, and crazy things will happen. So you do need to go onto Brooks' website and download the latest firmware and get that updated before you can start playing with it. Once you've installed that firmware, there is one important thing to note, and that is the sequence in which you connect that to your Moza. With both your wheelbase and your PlayStation turned on, with a red USB cable plugged into the Raslution adapter, plug the other end into the front-facing USB port of your PlayStation. Then plug your wheelbase into the Brooks Raslution adapter, and then you are good to go. Press the PlayStation button on your wheel, or whatever button represents the PlayStation button, and then you're ready to hit the road. I know it's a bit of a faff to have to do that every time you plug the Brook in. However, it is important you get that sequence right, and just as important that you use the front-facing USB port. I read about a lot of issues people were having with it disconnecting or just not functioning properly by using the ports on the rear of the PlayStation, possibly linked to overheating because that's where the exhaust fans of the PlayStation are. Okay, I've left the simulator behind and I've come up to my office because there's a few things I want to show you, primarily as much as anything, why you need a Brook Raslution adapter in the first place. Well, the main reason is because of PlayStation licensing agreement. It doesn't matter who they are, if you want to make any kind of third-party peripheral for a Sony PlayStation, you need a license, and that can be an expensive thing, but Sony are also very selective on who they choose to give licenses to. And with the exception of Logitech and Thrustmaster and obviously Fanatec, there's very few people who actually got a license to provide steering wheels for Sony PlayStations. Now what this means for us as the consumer is that we are very limited on our options for wheels. I mean, you've got companies like Logitech and Thrustmaster that are dominating the low end of the market, and then Fanatec are dominating the lower to mid-range market. And bearing in mind that a lot of us were burned a few years ago by Fanatec's inability to satisfy orders, me included. I even did a video on this exact subject. About coming up to 2 years ago, I placed an order for about £2,000 worth of equipment, and it just never got delivered, so I ended up cancelling my order. Now Fanatec own the new management. They're owned now by Corsair, the same people that own Elgato, and in fairness to them, they have kind of got their house in order as far as deliveries are concerned. However, brand confidence can take a long time to re-establish, and besides which, the build quality of their previous products wasn't particularly brilliant. Before I had the Brook adapter, I always used to use a Fanatec CSL steering wheel to play PlayStation games, which I keep down here on a collapsible wheel stand pro, and it's right here. Now the Fanatec served me quite well for the last 4 years or so. Although the build quality is a bit flaky, it's been back to Fanatec on 2 occasions since I've had it, and it really is getting life expired now. The pedals are pretty much at it, the downshifter's gone, and the directional joystick just doesn't want to know anymore. And so that's why I needed a new steering wheel. I was ready to pay top dollar to Fanatec for their best equipment, but that just didn't happen. And then shortly afterwards I got involved with Racing Prodigy, which you may have seen me do videos about in the past, which is where they take sim racers like me and you and take them over to America and then drop them into a real world race car in a real world racing series and then broadcast it live to the world. And while I was being interviewed, one of their major backers rang in to offer to buy me a new sim wheel and sim rig. I don't know about you, but that happens to me every day. And it's the same simulator you see me in at the start of this video, and it's all made by Moza. This is the Moza FSR steering wheel. It's sitting on a Moza R12 hub. It's got the Moza CRP pedals, and I've also got the Moza handbrake. Now, Moza are not compatible at all with Sony PlayStation. You try to plug that into a Sony PlayStation, it's not going to work. However, that is where the Brook adapter comes in, because it is compatible through this. What it does is it makes your PlayStation believe it is a Logitech G series wheel. Now if you're playing a PlayStation 4 or PlayStation 5 game, it makes it believe it's that, the Logitech G29, which was a decent steering wheel in its day. It's not a direct drive one, it's got a gearing system in there, and it's rather notchy. The force feedback is a bit dodgy if I'm honest with it. And if you're using a PlayStation 3, it makes it believe that you're using a Logitech G25, and that's quite an old steering wheel, that is. Now what's happening here is the Brook adapter is emulating a G25 on PS3 and a G29 on PS4 and PS5. So when you go to your game settings, go to the controller settings, you'll find that your controllers have been picked up as a G29 or a G25. And that leads to a couple of issues. First of all, you're limited to the number of buttons that you can configure. If you have come from this, the Moza FSR, there's dozens of buttons on there. Not just the ones you can see there, but these rotary controllers. There's multiple control paddles behind here. There's buttons on the rotary encoders as well. There's over 30 buttons that are configurable. So you're going to have a massive drop down to the PlayStation controller via the Logitech G25 and the G29. Now that might be alright, because obviously PlayStation controllers have only got a certain amount of controllers, so the games themselves have only got a certain amount of controls that are configurable. But there's a couple of other issues here, because on here it clearly has L2 and R2 buttons, obviously L1, L2, L3 and the corresponding R buttons, but on the Brook adapter there is no option for an L2 or an R2 button. You drop in a couple of buttons. Now, not only do you lose L2 and R2, but you'll also lose the rotary encoder and the enter button in the middle of it. You lose the plus and minus buttons here. You do get to keep the share button, the option button and the PlayStation button. You've got to have those. And you also get the directional controller. But you then got the 4 regular buttons, the square, circle, triangle and the X button. You've got L1, R1 and L3 and R3. That's it. So obviously the L1 and R1 are going to be your gear changes. So then you're suddenly dropping down to only 6 buttons you've got available to you. Is that enough for you? Now, as it happens, yes, I've been able to configure most of my games to be able to suit that, but it's not ideal. And there's another thing, because it is emulating a G29 or a G25 Logitech wheel, which are gear-driven machines rather than direct drive, it's actually doing a very, very good job of emulating the notchiness, which isn't necessarily a good thing. So when you're inputting your movements or it's getting force feedback, you can feel the notchiness. If you've ever used one of those Logitech wheels, you'll know what I mean. It's notchy, and trying to catch a spin, it's very difficult. Unlike a direct drive, which is more smooth and progressive, it's a little bit notchy. The force feedback itself, it's actually very powerful, and all of the settings, the steering lock, the amount of range it's got on it, the saturation and dead zone are all controllable on the Brook Raslution adapter itself, and it does a very, very good job of emulating the actual strength of the R12 wheelbase. And the R12, it's 12 newtons. That's quite a powerful thing, and you do get a workout playing the games through the adapter, even though it's pretending to be a Logitech steering wheel. But it's the notchiness, that's the bit that's you're losing some of the definition. And then to prove this, I've played the same game on 2 different systems using the same wheel, the only difference being the resolution adapter in the middle of it. I've not got many games that I've got on both PC and on PlayStation, but I do have EAWRC, and in this case I've got Dirt Rally 2. So here we go, this is my PS5 and this is my gaming PC. I'll run them side by side just for a few seconds so you can see what the difference is graphically. There's not too much in it, but the Windows PC running at full settings is just that little bit better. But other than that, the equipment I'm using to play the game is exactly the same. I'm using my Moza R12 and the FSR steering wheel. I'm sitting in my same next level racing sim rig, and I'm using the same lack of talent. And remember, I'm playing these 2 stages back to back. This is the Sweetland stage in Wales, which I know very, very well. I'm playing it in the MG Metro 6R4, and there was no time difference between me playing it on the PS5 and then playing it on the PC. All I did was I unplugged my Moza controller and plugged it into the Brook Raslution and changed over the speakers so that I could actually hear what I was doing. That was the only difference, that was the only delay. I played these back to back, so I got a first-hand experience of what the differences felt like between these 2 setups. And I'll be honest, there is a difference. Not in the force feedback. I really thought there was going to be some dilution of the strength going through the Brook Raslution adapter. But to be honest, it feels almost as strong, if not as strong, as playing it through the Moza Direct. No, it was in the jaggedness of the feel. The force feedback just feels jaggedy, as though it is actually emulating a gear drive. It's just not quite as smooth, not quite as premium is the word I'm going to use. It doesn't feel quite as expensive. However, it didn't dilute my fun, and it didn't dilute my stage time. I mean, look at this. I am within a tenth of a second on the same 6-minute stage using the same wheel and the same sim rig, but on 2 different systems. But that's Dirt Rally 2. What about other racing games? If you're into racing simulators, obviously you're going to be playing Gran Turismo 7 on PlayStation. Okay, it's not Assetto Corsa, it's not iRacing, but it's about as good as it gets on PlayStation. And I'll be honest, despite having all this kit and all these games available, GT7 is still the racing game I play more than any other. And as such, it's the game I've had most experience playing through the Brook Raslution adapter. So how does it feel? Well, it feels really good. Yeah, it doesn't quite feel as premium, as expensive a steering experience as playing it direct through the Moza, but it's very close. The force feedback is extremely strong. I've got no issue with it. It's just you lose a little bit of definition when you're putting your inputs into the steering wheel. This is F1 2020, which I still maintain is the best Formula 1 game of the Codemasters EA Sports era. Now, I found this, there was just a little bit of a loose feeling. It felt like the car was washing across the track a little bit light. So when I was actually turning the wheel, there wasn't quite so much feedback. There was plenty of feedback from going over the curbs like there, but there wasn't quite so much feel as I'm turning into the corner. It was just felt like I was washing across the surface of the track. It didn't feel quite right, that didn't. But maybe that's down to me not quite getting the settings right, because obviously you've got the settings in the game to configure how the steering is going to react, but also you've got settings that you can configure on the adapter itself. You've got the dead zones, you've got the saturation, you've got the amount of steering lock, and just getting it quite right, that's the challenge. But then it's challenging on all racing games. In fact, that's probably where you spend most of your time, is getting everything configured just right. But what about the PlayStation 3? How does it work on the PlayStation 3? Well, it actually works really well. Like I say, it recognises it as a Logitech G25. And I've been playing a few games. This is Sega Rally Revo, and it feels really good. The weight is exceptional. I was really surprised by how much weight there is coming through the steering wheel. It feels really good. And equally, GT5 and 6 were just as good. And you know what, as an aside, I'd forgotten how good the PS3 looks. I mean, this is F1 Championship Edition from 2006. Such a cracking game and loads of great cars from a fantastic era of Formula 1. But what happens if you don't want to play simulation games? Want to play a bit of arcade? The PS3 had it in droves. This is Burnout Paradise. What a game and what a soundtrack. And then of course, you've got the Need for Speed series. There was about 6 or 7 different games on the PS3. This is Need for Speed Hot Pursuit, a reimagining of a game from the late 90s on PC and PlayStation I used to play when I was at university. I've been able to play it on my Moza with the Brooks adapter. It's just superb. Yeah, it was impressive. Oh yeah, and it might not advertise this, but the Brook Raslution adapter also works with Xbox 360 and Xbox One. That means you can be playing all the Forza Horizon and Forza Motorsport games, Test Drive Unlimited, and all the Need for Speed and Formula 1 games available on Xbox 2, which is nice. So I could get the PlayStation adapter to work on PS3, so that's GT5, Prologue and GT6, Sega Rally Revo and no end of F1 games, but it would not work on a backward compatible PS3 to work on PS1 or PS2. It just wasn't having any of it, unfortunately. It would sort of sync up with the controller, but it would mess things up, so that's not a goer. So what do I think of the Brook Raslution 2 adapter for Sony PlayStation? Well, when I first plugged it into my PlayStation and then plugged my Moza into it and got some crazy inputs going on, I thought I'd made a mistake. However, then I found out it was a firmware issue. Went to the Brook website, downloaded the firmware, updated the hardware. It's worked spot on ever since. I'm not going to say it's worked perfectly. There are some quirks you need to be aware of. You've got to get the sequence that you connect it into your PlayStation correct, otherwise it will come up with all kinds of little issues. You've also got to make sure you plug it into the correct port on your PlayStation. Plug it into the front, not on the back, and then everything should behave itself as it should. Then there's the issue of you're losing some of the functionality of your steering wheel. Not all the buttons are going to work, you're limited to the amount of buttons that you can use. Then there's the fact that it emulates the jaggedness of a gear-driven wheel rather than smooth creaminess of a direct drive wheel. So you've got a very expensive wheel, you've lost functionality, and you've lost the nice feel of it. So am I going to criticise it? Well, I can't give it a 5-star rating for those reasons. However, I am going to give it a 4-star rating because I think it's great. I've been able to use my Moza racing ecosystem on a PlayStation. I shouldn't be allowed to do that. Now, people have told me, well, you can use the Drive Hub. There's a similar system called Drive Hub, and people have raved about it. Try and get hold of one. They don't make it anymore. They stopped selling it years ago. You cannot buy it brand new. You can buy it secondhand off of eBay if you can find one. I even saw one in CEX, but try and get hold of one. Very, very difficult. This is your main option, and it works well enough for me to recommend it to you, provided you can look past the quirky nature of installing it, the quirky nature of losing functionality. It works. It allows me to use my Moza to play I always say Grand Theft Auto, GT7. It allows me to play the old Formula 1 games. It allows me to play the old Dirt Rally games. Dirt Rally 1 allows me to play Pikes Peak. I can't play it on any other system except my PS4/PS5 on Dirt Rally. Yeah, and I can play it with my Moza. That's fantastic. I love being able to play whatever game I want on whatever system I want. I've got these consoles. I've got old Dell Windows 98 and Windows XP computers. I like being able to play whatever game I want on whatever system I want whenever I want. And this allows me to play Moza systems on a PlayStation. And that's priceless to me. This cost £106 5 months ago, and I've just checked on Amazon and it still costs £106. If you want to play something other than Fanatec, Logitech or Thrustmaster on your Sony PlayStation, this is a good shout. And remember, I paid for this out of my own money. I am not an affiliate in any way. I do not get any revenue from this video. If you go and buy a Brook Raslution adapter, I don't get anything for it. I just wanted to share what my findings were having used this for 5 months. Anyway, I hope you found this video useful. Do consider a like, a comment, and maybe even a subscribe. And I shall see you on the next video. Take it easy.